Dieter Brugger. I'm the Managing Director of the Business Model Innovation Lab. That's a spin-off of the Institute of Technology Management of the University of St. Gallen. And I will be talking about how you can develop your unique business model systematically from concept to market launch. Gary Hamel, a famous professor at the London Business School, around 10 years ago, famously said, in the future, competition will not take place between products and companies, but between business models, which means that products will still be important, but it goes beyond. The product itself is one key component of how you can get a competitive advantage in the business market. A good example to showcase how this whole thing works is if you look at Apple. Apple in Q4 2019, the 30% market share of the total global smartphone sales. 30%, which means 70% was taken by other producers like Samsung, Huawei, and so on. If we look at the total profit share of the industry, that shows a quite different picture. Here, Apple, even though it only sells 30% of total smartphones, has a 72% share when it comes to profit. Why is that? Well, when we look at it, how the situation was in 2015, you had three parallel business models that in the smartphone industry were present. You had the hardware providers like Samsung, Huawei, the ones who were actually building and selling the smartphones. Then you had operating system providers like Android and Microsoft. And the only company that at this time was actually able to integrate both the hardware and operating system side together with additional products inside of the ecosystem was Apple. And because of this, they were able to get far more out of their smartphones than anybody else did. If you look at the situation now in 2020, you can see that most companies have adjusted to this and are now also integrators. This shows that Apple's initial business model was the one leading the market, and they still, even though everybody else is trying to get into the same sort of business model, that Apple is still succeeding in getting most out of it because they started earlier and thus still have a competitive advantage. Now, what exactly is a business model and why is it important for innovation? Well, let's first look at what innovation actually means. This is Joseph A. Schumpeter, who already in 1911 said that innovation is the successful market introduction of a technical or organizational novelty, not just its invention. This is an important point because it shows that having the technologically best product doesn't mean that you actually succeed in the market. A real innovation only comes into play when you introduce it into the market and when customers actually want it. The best way of showing how to get to such an innovation, where you don't only have the best product or the best technology, but you actually have the best business model in total, is to look at it in a very systematic but simple way. To us, or how we call it, the magic triangle, a business model is always composed of four central dimensions. The first one being the who dimension. Now, who means, well, who is the customer? Who are you doing this whole thing for? This is always central to any business model and should always be the starting point of any new business developed. The second dimension is the what, also considered the value proposition, but also combined with all the products and services that you offer. So what do you offer to the customer actually? The third dimension is the how dimension, and that looks more closely at the value chain. So how is the value proposition created? Which partners, which resources, what is needed in order to generate the thing that you are offering to your customer segment? And the fourth dimension, another really important and central one, is the why dimension, which in this case means why is it profitable? What is the revenue model behind it? And how is the company able to capture value? Now, only if all of these 4 dimensions are in sync, you can actually talk about a sustainable business model. Now, quite often, startups concentrate on only 2 of these dimensions, the who and the what dimension. They want to be as close as possible to the customer and try to build something that creates most value for the customer, often forgetting that it is also about capturing value for the company. Corporates, on the other hand, quite often look more closely at the how and why. So trying to make it more profitable, reduce costs, trying out new revenue models. Well, that is very fine if you want to capture more value, but if you don't have a customer to support it who is interested in that solution, you will also fail. How can one develop an innovative business model? Well, this is a question that we asked ourselves some years ago, and we did an extensive research at the University of St. Gallen on this topic, looking at over 250 successful businesses that have been successful over the last century. And we looked at them in order to see if there is something that they have in common. And the conclusion was this map, which in the first moment doesn't tell you a lot, but each of these lines represents a particular business model that was used or created in the time between 1900 or even before until today. Now, if we look more closely into it, we can actually see that each of these lines have these little stops, which are different companies that were in time using this specific business model. And the 2 interesting conclusions were that on the one hand, one company would most often not only use one particular business model, but several at the same time to get to this competitive advantage. And even more importantly, that there were various companies from different industries that over time used the exact same business model in order to be successful in the market. From this, we concluded that there is a set of new business models or business model patterns that were present in nearly every industry and could explain the success of particular companies in a variety of industries. And so we concluded that 55, and nowadays, because we did the study again last year, nowadays around 60 business model patterns can explain nearly all new innovations that take place in all industries worldwide. Now, the interesting facts that come from this is that over 90% of all business model innovations are recombinations. They are simply recombinations of other industries. And it makes absolute sense to look at patterns in other industries to increase the innovation potential for one's own business. It also shows that creating a business model is actually possible in a very, very systematic way by looking at how others did it. A good example of one of these business model patterns is the razor and blade model. In theory, it just looks at selling a basic product, which is sold very cheaply, and actually make money from the lock-in that you generate by selling this product and then getting money from consumables. It's a business model that was already present in 1880 when the Standard Oil Company and John D. Rockefeller was facing a saturated petroleum market in the US. And his idea was to go to China and there give petroleum lamps to the public for free. Well, at the moment where these petroleum lamps were empty, there was a need for new petroleum, and he would already be there selling this petroleum because he created a new market there. The same logic was then, a couple of years later, applied by Gillette, from which this model also takes its name. There, the razor, as it is still today, is sold rather cheaply, and Gillette is getting most of its money by selling blades that are consumables that are in need of replacement quite often. Same logic 80 years later, used by Hewlett-Packard with printers. Printers still are sold rather cheaply. The money is made through ink or through selling ink. Same logic a couple of years later with Nestlé in a completely different industries, consumer industry. The coffee machines that they are selling are sold at cost price. and the actual money is made through the consumables, through these coffee chips that you use in order to make coffee. Apple did a very similar thing. They just went at it in a different way. They actually made music very, very cheap to buy and had a very expensive phone or iPod at the time that you would have to buy in order to listen to this music while you were on the run. Now, how to get from an idea to market launch, and using this model or these patterns that we have introduced, we then went further and developed a methodology that helps you to get systematically from your initial situation to a full-fledged business model and a way to test and implement it up until to the market launch. The basic information that you need is that business model development is a process that is assumptions-based. That means at the beginning of every business model that you're creating, you have a lot of initial assumptions, not facts, not proofs, not something that you already know, but assumptions that you need to prove. Over time, you're trying to de-risk your business model continuously by making these initial assumptions into knowledge. And this process is the starting point and the end point of every startup that is created. Now we look at the methodology in a little bit more detail. It is composed of 4 phases. The first phase being the initiation phase, where you're analyzing the ecosystem. This is the phase where you look at all the actors inside of this industry, where you're developing your startup or your new business, and looking at the change drivers that are in place. For this, we have created this tool that can help you in order to get all of the possible opportunities from your ecosystem directly in the way. You look at the ecosystem in a narrower sense, looking at your own company and possibilities that arise from the product and the offering that you have. You look at users and customers, you look at complementers and partners, but you also look at it from a wider sense, political and legal implications, what competitors are doing or which new entrants are coming in, if culture has its place, or if there are new technological or trends advancements that need to be taken into account. Through this, you should create a list of opportunities on which you can then try to figure out if there is an interesting business model to be developed in order to get a competitive advantage in the market against everybody else who is in there. In the second phase, the ideation phase, you're generating new ideas. And this is done by using these 55 plus now actually 60 business model patterns and confronting them with your business and seeing if some of the logics that have been successful in other industries and for other companies actually apply to your business and or can be applied to your business. You look in the similarity principle at companies and industries that are close to you. This normally improves your first thoughts on a business model. With the confrontation principle, you look at very different industries. For example, if you're operating in a B2C industry, look at B2B industrial applications and see how they tried to get a competitive advantage. And this normally, if successful, leads to completely new disruptive business models. Now that you have these ideas, you want to integrate them. Integration for us means that you want to build consistency, check externally and internally if your business model is viable, if it works. And the starting point for this, obviously, is to document your business model in the business model canvas. You then check if the who and what dimensions, everything related to your value proposition and customer thoughts, is consistent with customers that you interview. And you look at your operating model and at your revenue model by checking the internal consistency. So checking if the business case adds up and checking if partners are actually interested in working with you if that is needed. The fourth phase then, once you have done this first check, is the implementation part, which is the hardest. It looks at various tests that help you to cheaply find out if your idea has potential and can be successful in the market. For this, we created this microcycle, how to get from a concept to a more validated business model. You always start looking at the concept that you have in your business model, identify the most critical assumptions, build hypotheses on that, then choose a test format that can help you in a cheap and quick way to test your business model or your critical assumptions. You develop a test setup, look at recruitment, look at how to get feedback, and then execute the tests. Then you analyze the results and you update this business model concept. Obviously, this is not a single iteration. You need a couple of iterations in order to get from your first concept to your final marketable solution. And here you can see what these development stages of a business model are. To start, ideating, finding interesting concepts. You then check through this first external and internal validation if you have a problem solution fit. So if you have found an interesting problem and you have identified the right solution. Once you've seen that, you check for the product market fit. So you create a first product, an MVP, a prototype, and you try to find the right market for it. After you have done that, you can actually check if you have potential for a well-working revenue model, if somebody's willing to pay for it. This you can only do once you have some sort of product established. Once you have done this and you found out that people are willing to pay for your solution, you then go on to trying to replicate this and check for the value delivery. So if the value chain adds up even on a more scalable way, so not only a single product, but multiple ones. And eventually you go on and you check for scaling opportunities. If you can identify a growth cycle that helps you, and KPIs that help you at this stage at market launch to really see if your business and your business model can and is successful. This, in a nutshell, is how you create a business model from scratch and bring it into the market. I hope you enjoyed this little intro to it. Good luck with developing your unique business model. If you have any questions, please contact me. You can also go to our website where most of the tools that I've now shown you and the methodology, you can simply download or have access to it. Good luck with everything and keep innovating.